Steven, do you think they'll arrest me if I don't go to jury duty that I forgot that I changed to because I'm in California and I can't be at jury duty when they want me to be at jury duty? I don't know. So if I don't show up for work, you know why.
So there I was at Sony Kando in California on Thursday when I get a text message from the jury duty selection people letting me know that I am no longer needed for jury duty on Friday. And I was like,
Yes.
well, that's a good thing because I won't be there anyway because I'm flying all day. I don't know what happened there, Stephen.
I'm surprised you didn't try and get out of it.
I don't try to get out of it. I move it. And I did move it. But I'm not sure what, because I went in physically and I moved on the back end. You can go 2 or 3 months out, changing the date. And so I don't know why I picked this Friday, that particular Friday when I knew I was going to be at Kando, unless I still felt like I was not going to end up going to Kando. And then I forgot to change it. But there was a reason why I made it that Friday. And the reason I made it that Friday is because Monday was a holiday and I knew that they were going to be out, which means they try to clear the docket before Friday so everybody can have a longer weekend that's working. And so that was why I chose to pick a holiday before, a Friday before a holiday, because I figured there would be more of a chance that I would be exempt from it at that point. And it's a good thing because I would have been traveling. I would have just called them on the phone and be like, hey, I totally blanked. Can we just change it? And they will just change it again.
Now, since you were dismissed, is it not for another 2 or 3 years that they'll reach out again?
No, it's a year. It says
Only
a minimum
year?
of a year.
Is that just PA or is that...
It could just be Philly. I've been called numerous times to go do this thing in the last 10 years.
I'm pretty sure my county, I think it's every 3 years or something.
Look, I'm all for jury duty. I really like getting a $6 check for the day. I mean, I'm a big fan of that. I have no problem with doing jury duty. I like being around all of our peers. Look at me. Look at me. Are you picking me to go on a jury? I show up with an I Shoot Raw sleeveless shirt. I mean, I guess I could show up with that. I mean, you probably shouldn't. It may say wear normal clothes. Well, to me, this is what my boss tells me I can wear. But imagine they come up and they ask you a question. I mean, all I'd get up there and say is, I hate Jews. And they'd be like, oh, you're perfect for this. Oh, you're perfect. Oh, shit. Damn, that worked. You're a Jew hater. Oh, great. It's just like, I don't hate Jews. But I mean, that's literally what it is. They're literally interviewing jurors when they go to pick someone and looking for a specific, they're what's that type casting? What's that thing? Profiling. Yes,
for sure.
They are profiling to try and meet the criteria for how many women, how many men, how many Latinos, how many black people, how many crazy looking people.
I mean, my brother is a police officer, and usually that will get me out of jury duty because there's somewhat of a bias there, obviously. But sometimes it also doesn't help me out, and they want to pick me because, I'm a family member of a police officer. It might help their case.
Yeah. Do you like sushi? I do. Do you like politics? No. I hate Jews. Ah, shit, that doesn't work here? Anyway, so I'm free of jury duty for the next at least year, but I'm sure I'll get it again. And we're busy. It's not like I work for a big company where you want that day off, even though it's not a day off, but it technically is because you're not at work, but you're also forced to go sit in this shitty room for a while. I just like sitting down next to the pretty ladies that I find in the room.
I've gotten out of it the first time by saying I worked for a small company and I couldn't take off or something like that. But that only worked one time. They wouldn't allow it after that. They're like, all right, you got one free pass. That's it.
Yeah, I would just change the date. But no, I remember the last time I walked into jury duty years and years and years ago. And I look through the room. I look for ladies sitting by themselves. I sit next to them or close and I try to strike up a conversation. Ha, how are you? Are you enjoying jury duty just like me? Because it is lots of fun.
It says in Pennsylvania, anyone who has served on a trial fewer than 3 days does not need to serve again for 1 year, but anyone who has served more than 3 days does not have to serve again for 3 years.
That's so stupid. A year? A year? It's how many people do we have in this state that you have to force us to do it every year?
Yeah, a year's a little much.
If it's under 3 days. Anyway, that's my jury duty story that I didn't realize till I was sitting there in Kando. If you've seen stuff come out of Kando, you've probably seen some social influencer people being all like, this is amazing trip. Oh my God, I had so many friends. It was like so incredible. It wasn't incredible for me. I'll leave it at just that. I'm not a big fan of those types of trips. I rather have when Sony used to schedule some really good photo trips where it's photographers and you go and do good excursions. There were no good excursions on this. And I didn't like it.
They were more official press trips, though, where you were testing out gear. So they would set up these insane photo shoots and, like you said, excursions. But at Kando, it's more like let's get everyone together in one giant hotel and have a big party.
Kumbaya, my lord. Kumbaya. Let's sit around the fire.
That is totally the vibe they're going for.
And tickle everybody's balls. Sony's so amazing, everybody. On 3, everybody. 1, 2, 3. I love Sony.
Here, everybody. Here's some Kool-Aid. Pass it around.
Oh, you get a lens. You get a lens. Everybody say it. I love Sony.
Look under your seats. Free A93.
Jared, why aren't you saying I love Sony? Why aren't you saying it? Because I don't love Sony. Everybody boo him. Boo him. Shame him.
Shame.
I'm not going to say it's a cult, Steven.
But honestly, though, it's every brand. Every brand has their cult followers, their fanboys, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
And this is essentially the collective fanboys for Sony coming together, minus you.
The cult of Sony runs strong. The cult of Sony runs strong. So I was flying home from Kando, and I had a problem going from Phoenix to Philly with my camera equipment and my bag. I ran into some really, I almost said it, really unnice ladies at the gate agents in Phoenix. They were really being...
Say it.
Bitches for the... That's not the word I wanted to use, but they were really being fucking soup Nazis for carry-on. Right? They're like, if you have more than 2 items, you will have to... Oh, is that Donald Trump? If you have more than 2 items, you're going to have to get on the plane to China. the plane. Anyway, they're like, if you have a fanny pack, that counts as an item. I was like, fuck you people. So I'm standing there. I've got my roller bag that I've already flown on 3 flights of 4 for this trip. I have my 4x5 in there. I have my tripod strapped to the side of it. I have my backpack and I have my dark bag. So theoretically, I do have an extra item, the dark bag. But being that the dark bag is flat, I'm usually able to, when I get to the gate, if someone says, in the rare occasion they say that's an extra item, I'm like, hey, this is...
Takes up absolutely no room.
It's flat. Yeah. It's going to sit right on top. It doesn't take up any space. Is this okay? And they usually, just let you go. Mm-hmm. Well, not only did they call that out, which that's fine. You can call that item out because, yes, I get it. She was telling me that I have too many items. She's counting your backpack, your roller bag, and your tripod. I'm like, my tripod is attached to my roller bag. It's in the tripod holder on the side of the bag and strapped to the fucking bag.
One piece.
That is an item. I'm like, it's not. It's part of the bag. She's like, that's one extra item. I'm like, what? She's like, I can't do anything about that. I'm like, oh, of course you can. I'm like, I've flown 3 flights already on this trip. This is my 4th going home. I got here without a problem. Well, that's not how we do it here in Phoenix. Oh. And you knew you had a problem right there.
Yep.
That they were just being cunts. Yeah, I just said it. And so then she's like, well, I'll call my, she's like, I started to go down the line, and then she's like, you have to come back here. You're being watched by cameras, and the cops will be here in a matter of seconds if you do anything. I'm like, that's how you're starting this off?
Oh, geez.
Fuck you. Fuck you. So I'm standing there. Mind you, I was boarding in zone 1. There's a reason I have status with American Airline is so that I can more protect my gear, right?
And this is American, correct?
American Airlines, and I got upgraded to first class, so I have space for everything.
But you're a card holder, a status holder. Like, I don't understand why they can't throw you a bone.
No, because they were looking for issues. So she calls her supervisor. She says, only my supervisor can trump me. Her supervisor comes over and says, I can't trump you. Our rules are our rules. And I'm like, what are you talking about? As I'm standing there, as other people are just walking by, getting on the plane, I'm like, so when all the bins are full, by the time I get on the plane, what are you going to tell me then?
Yeah.
Right. Our rules, our contract that you signed says, I'm like, no, like the contract that I sign when I buy a ticket. What are you talking about? I know what I can carry on a plane. My tripod is strapped to the side of the bag. That is part of my carry-on. It's not a separate item. When it's part of a bag, it needs to be individually wrapped. I'm like, so what is the solution here? Oh, well, and this is like, talk about escalating. Talk about really saying the wrong thing to someone, me. You could fly another airline, or you could ship it. And I'm like, that's very helpful right now while I'm standing here waiting to board my flight home, to tell me that I could ship my tripod home. That's very helpful right now. Thank you. And I'm like, so what are my choices right now? Well, you have to check it. I'm like, okay. And are you going to, approve, like if something happens to it? Oh, no. Like, you didn't put it in a bag. So they just kept throwing it on me. And then like one of the pilots came out and he didn't want to have it. He was dealing with something else. I'm like, hey, do you mind like stepping in and saying that this is okay for me to carry on? Yeah. And he couldn't, and I got it and I understood. But they were being such fucking assholes about it. So I had to so she prints out the thing. Literally, I have to put it around the tripod legs, the sticker. I'm like, cool, this is great.
Can't wait till that gets lost.
So they're like, we'll take it down to the people. I get on the plane. First thing I do is I say to the flight attendant, hi, I had an issue getting my stuff on the plane, which should have been allowed on the plane. Can you ask them to hand it to you so that it could be right here? And she's like, yes. So she calls up, she asks them, she comes back and she says, they won't give it to me. They are forcing, I'm like, yeah, you want to talk about vindictive fucks? Yeah. They are being vindictive fucking pieces of shit who have a superiority complex because they actually have one thing that they can control in their life. Now, I didn't say any of this shit because I'm not going to get kicked off the plane or fucking arrested for some bullshit. So I checked the fucking tripod and the dark bag and, so I had to wait for it 20 minutes for it to come off. It came off. Everything was fine, but that wasn't even the point. The point is that they were fucking pieces of shit. So you can push back. You can only push back so far if they're just being pieces of shit and they don't. And I looked on the website. There's nothing on the website that specifies anything about this carry-on stuff anymore. It's not there. They leave it to the discretion of the gate agent.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's just like they give themselves an out by taking away all of that stuff. Now, I will tell you that 99 out of 100 times it's been fine. And I'm able to talk my way through. But the only reason I checked my tripod, I would never check the Aero Ectar. I would never check any of the camera equipment or lenses. I would physically go get a trash bag, put it in a trash bag, and carry it on with me and put it up above. Or carry it with me, which they would have been shitheads about too.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, fuck you. Of course, I can choose not to take the flight.
Of course.
I can choose to do something else. But, running it through in my head, the tripod is going to be most likely fine. Yeah. It's unfortunate that it's not in a bag, but it got there. And of course, the flat thing got there, and that's fine. I would never listen to them in checking my one of the other things, you could check your roller instead. I'm like, are you a fucking idiot? Like, are you really just a fucking moron? Honestly, yes, answer that, because you are a fucking moron working this piece of shit job. That's the shit you think and do not say, because you don't want to denigrate someone and the job that they're doing. But that's what you're thinking. Like, are you fucking kidding me right now? You just love that you could stand here and have a little bit of power in your life. But I'm not going to be one of those people that someone's going to film and put on the internet and do that. I'll tell you that right now. It's what's going through my head the whole time. Yeah. But it's not like, do you know who I am? Because that's going through my head the whole time. I would never say it. But it's just like, it's not, and no, I wasn't even thinking, do you know who I am? Like, that matters. And it was more so that you guys are just fucking wrong. You're just wrong.
Well, it's more of the, do you know who I am and what I could put on the internet type thing. I could film this entire thing and make a very public podcast about it.
It's not worth that, but I know they're wrong. And the problem is they don't care.
Yeah.
And every time I'm like, okay, so if I had an umbrella in my side pocket where a tripod is, would that? Oh, well, that's an umbrella. I'm like, and
It's the same size.
well, see, that's the shit that I say to them.
Yeah. But that's also not attached or part of my bag.
Correct.
So wouldn't you also consider that a separate item?
Well, that's not a problem. I'm like, okay, so I obviously see what you're doing here is you're being a piece of shit. So at that point, I know that there's nothing I can say, regardless of being right or wrong.
But in the end, it did make it home. I assume it was in good condition, hopefully?
Yes.
Not thrown around?
If not, I would have taken it right to the place and told them they owe me money.
Sure, yeah. Which tripod was this?
My Big Ben Row tripod for my 4x5. And also part of the difference is I was on my way home. So I take that into consideration that if something happens to my tripod on the way home, not as big of a deal as if I'm on my way out somewhere.
Of course.
So all of that shit's going through my brain, but I wanted to get on the plane and I didn't worry about my shit being broken or not when I got on the plane because I'm like, it is what it is. And when I get there, I'll deal with it.
Yeah.
And so that's just the nature of the beast. So fuck off. Pieces of shit gate agents.
Always something with you and flying. I feel like there's always some kind of story.
Oh, and the other thing, like I had 22 minutes to get to my connecting flight, and this was the connecting flight. And so these, people, you get off a plane, you got these two kids that are looking like they sat in first class for the very first time, and I get to the people mover.
Not walking?
And the people mover clogs up. Yeah, the people mover clogs up because these fucking douchebags are on their phones. One's leaning on the left, one's leaning on the right, and no one asks them to move.
Doesn't it say if you're on the left, you need to keep moving? If you're on the right, you can stay still or static?
Walk to the left, stand to the right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, excuse me.
Yeah.
Excuse me, because I'm trying to get to my flight.
Pay attention.
Excuse me. And they look at you like you're I'm like, look, if you had to catch a flight, you would want to do everything you can to catch that flight quicker.
That's why they have them there, for people that are trying to catch the flight.
Way, you lazy fuck. You lazy, and so I realized at Kando, it brought the Philly out of me. I realized that everybody else in this country is a bunch of pussies. Like, seriously, a bunch of little wusses. So I got the Philly brought out of me, and I realized what that is that everybody else is just so timid.
You sure it's just not the Jared, not so much the Philly?
No, man, I'm not a dick. I'm not, but it's just like,
you sure?
But everybody's afraid to like say something that they're going to hurt someone's feelings, but that they'll think it, but they won't say it.
Well, I mean, nobody wants to be rude. I think there's no problem with that.
They're being rude standing on the people mover.
Oh, I'm not talking about that. I thought you were talking about Kando, complaining about something,
No, I'm not talking about Kando. I'm saying that I realized like traveling there, traveling there and doing other things. Like when you're doing things, people are just so timid and afraid and just speak up, get out of the fucking way. And I just realized that is the Philly. It's like, come on. And it gets misconstrued, which leads us to this voicemail that I'm going to play you right now. Here's a voicemail from my buddy Stu.
Hey, it's Stu. I just saw your video from Kando with that Mark Bennett guy. Why did you have to be such a dick to him?
Thanks, Stu. So Stu's talking about this video, and I went and watched this video, and I have my thoughts on it. Steven watched the video and has his thoughts on it. So Steven's going to run the audio from Mark Bennett's video interview of me at Kando right now, and then we're going to discuss it.
All right, here we are with the hardest working man on YouTube. This guy never stops, puts out tons of videos, shoots professional sports, shoots professional politicians. Boy, we all aspire to be like Jared Polin. At least I certainly do. Now, quick question for you.
Yeah.
What is the first setup you ever had for a YouTube video? Your first few videos.
Yeah.
What was your camera?
It was a Nikon D3S that shot 5 minutes of 720 HD. Sat in a chair in my backyard, set a timer on my iPhone to 4 minutes and 30 seconds because I knew that when I heard the ting, I had to wrap up the video.
Nice.
And so my original setup was my D3S with either an 85-1.4, 24-70, 2.8 was probably what I was using, maybe a 50-1.4. But yeah, that was the original setup, and then I added a Sony mic real quick, a lavalier.
Wow, and now it's turned into millions of subscribers and the Jared Polin that we all know and love. Now, also, we're at Sony Kando, so I might as well do this. What is the Sony camera that you have used the most, do you think, in your career?
Nope, none.
None.
No, I don't use them very much. I mean, I had a 2-year period of using Sony as my main after Nikon shit the bed with their Z6s and Z7s couldn't autofocus. So I used a A7 R4 when I went on the road with Bernie in 2019, and then I got the A1, which was obviously fantastic. But at that point, I decided that the Canon glass was what I wanted to use, and the R3 was the compromise to go to 24 from 50 megapixels, but the autofocus was better and the glass choices are better.
Yeah, see, there you go right here. This is a real YouTube integrity. He's at Sony Kando. He won't be swayed. He's going to tell you.
No.
He's going to tell you what he thinks.
Yeah, you're not swaying me. Not happening.
Thanks so much, Fro. Look at this hair. Oh my God.
Yep.
You think I could do that?
Nope.
No.
Steven, was I a dick in that interview?
I see. I know the real you, and I know how much of a dick you could be, and I don't think you were a dick in that video. I thought you were actually totally fine. I could see people being like, look at him with his sunglasses on, sitting there, and not even like, caring at all. But like, that's just because Mark kind of came up out of nowhere and was like, hey, here's a microphone in your face. What's up? But I don't think you were being a dick. I think being a dick would be totally ignoring him or being like, get that out of my face.
Yes, Stu. No, I think the questions were fine. Also, no one, like, he literally came up to me. I was working because I was pissed off at the event, as you know. I wasn't happy.
You?
And so I was focused on working on something, and I was sitting by myself at one of the tables, and the guy came up to me and asked if he could interview me. So I was like, okay. What made no sense is why his flag box had that Matt knows Matt or whatever that Matt knows video or whoever that guy with the
I
beard.
saw he was on the Kando trip as well, so I assume he just had a flag, and Mark probably won a kind of a prop of some sort, is my guess. Yeah. But I like Mark Bennett a lot. He's got this like quirky little funny attitude, does a lot of mainly Sony content. He does even like funny videos, like he would give the best of awards for reviews. He would literally review other photographers' reviews of cameras. Like yours or Tony and Chelsea or whoever. That might be how I first started watching him. But I am an active subscriber of his channel, and I do like his content.
I was anything but a dick.
I agree. I do agree.
To the point, my glasses are on because I'm outside, so my glasses were on, and I'm sensitive to light. But you wanted to read the comments, Steven?
Well, yeah, and I was scrolling through my feed, and I come across the thumbnail, which has you in it. The first thing I thought, I'm like, oh, God. I hope he was okay on camera. I hope he was fine. And I immediately checked the comments before even watching. And some of them were like, Jared was a dick. Jared was this, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, and I watched it. And I'm like, I thought you were fine. I thought you were totally okay.
Well, when Stu called me to tell me that I was a dick in a video, or why did I have to be such a dick to that guy, I was like, what are you talking about? I had no idea. So I watched it and I was like, I'm fine, man.
I think the difference is it's everyone's, on an all-time high, like all about like, yeah, let's answer questions. Yeah, let's be cool and funny on camera. And then it comes to you and you're like, yeah, what do you want? So it just goes from like an all-time high to an all-time low. But I don't think you were being a dick at all. Again, you would have been like, get that freaking mic out of my face if that was the case. But I did read through some of the comments, and I picked out some of my favorites that I want to mention here on air. One of them said, Jared didn't drink the Kool-Aid. Another one said, I really enjoyed your talk with Jared. He can be such an ass sometimes, but we love him. Also, who else has a money truck? Another one said, Jared seems like such a nice, friendly guy with a winky face. But my favorite is people saying like, Jared is so cool. He doesn't give a fuck. And that's how I take it, that you're just like, I'm going to say what I want to say, and I don't care what you think. I don't care what you... That's your mentality, but that's you.
That's the Philly, man.
Again, I don't think that's the Philly. I think that is you.
Okay, it's me and the Philly, but why would I not answer the guy's question? I mean, like when you asked me what your favorite Sony camera of all time is or something.
You said no.
I said nope.
But, you were an A1 shooter at the time. That probably was your all-time favorite camera a few years back. Now I would say it'd be the A9 III. You could have gotten into that, but instead you're like, nope.
Nope. That's because everybody else is going to sit there and be like, hey, Sony, so amazing, blah, blah, blah.
You actually responded to that last one about, saying Jared is so cool, he doesn't give a fuck. You said, my friend called me and said I was a dick in this video, so I got worried that I did something wrong. I just watched it. Nope, totally fine. That's me. Good question. And not being a dick.
Yeah, I usually don't, comment on other people's videos, but they weren't bad comments. They were like, they were fine. And it's not about not giving a fuck. If you ask me a question, I'm answering it how I'm going to answer it. It has nothing to do with, I give a lot of fucks. That's the thing. I give more fucks than most people give fucks. I give so many fucks that there's so many fucks to be given that no one has any more fucks to be given because I give all the fucks.
Well, and someone said, at Frono's photo, replying to your comment saying, I actually appreciate your response. It does seem like they are all Sony fanboys at the event, but you tell it like it is. And I 100% agree with that comment. And then you have people saying, I see the same quote unquote too cool for school attitude that the others are seeing. It isn't the honesty of the Sony answer. It's the vibe like he's annoyed you approached him. He never smiles. He never looks at you. He's hidden behind sunglasses. Every other interview was so much more engaging and friendly. Yes, my opinion.
Yeah, and I call that undiagnosed autism. Like, I don't like looking at people. I don't think I have autism, but I have tendencies where I don't like to make eye contact with certain people, just people in general. I really don't make great eye contact. I just don't.
The funny thing is, you are such an extrovert, but at the same time, you are an introvert when it comes to
I'm an introverted
social...
extrovert.
Yeah, I'd say that's a good way to put it.
Well, I heard people talk about social batteries before, and sometimes, their social battery is drained. People come up with stupid terms for dumb shit, and that's one of them. But at the end, and that was probably the last day of the event, and I was already like, I'm tired of talking to these people. I don't want to put on a fake attitude of any kind. I will tell you, the best part about the trip, I sat with Burkhart, right? Mm-hmm. You know him?
Yeah.
Chris. I sat with him at a table, this Orwig guy, Matt Klaskowski, me, and there were a couple of other actual photographers that do shit like in the real world and aren't fanboys. They're artisans and stuff. I had a great time sitting around the table with them. It was like sitting with Junior. It was like sitting with athletes. They were busting balls. No one was getting offended. It was great. They weren't fan people. They were talking about what, certain things they're creating, and it was good. Like, I enjoyed sitting with those people, but all the other stuff, it was not my jam. But that was good. Now, one thing I did enjoy was working with Dave Burnett. David Burnett was there. He's a great photojournalist going back 50 plus years at this point. In the 90s, grabbed a 4x5, started taking that to the Olympics, started photographing political figures with his 4x5. And I knew he was coming on the trip, so I took my 4x5, and my goal was to do some candids of him with his 4x5 doing portraits and get a portrait of him, which I have posted on Instagram, on my at Jared Polin Instagram, and it's a really good portrait. I'm very happy with the results that I was able to get, but I wanted to sit down with David for an interview. Steven wasn't there, so I just took those Hollyland magnetic microphone, since it comes with two. I plugged it into my iPhone. I used a record app on the iPhone. I used the noise cancellation because we were sitting outside, so the audio is what it is. I think the audio is perfectly fine for an interview, but you might hear some birds in the background, maybe some low-level music, maybe some chairs ruffling because we were doing it, or shuffling because we were doing it outside. All in all, it was just a really good conversation for about an hour. Honestly, I think there was certain things that I wanted to talk about but couldn't get to.
Sure.
We could have talked for 5 hours, and there were things that he and I talked about 30 minutes privately another time that I wish we got into, but sometimes with the interview, you go where you need to go, and he had an hour, and anything longer than that, you start to get, people start to not enjoy. So I wish we were able to go longer because there's so much more to say. But for now, Steven and I are going to sign off. After the sign off, you're going to get the hour-long interview with David, and that's going to be the end of this RAWtalk episode number 117. So here we go. Enjoy my conversation with David Burnett.
Jealous of the fact that you haven't stripped out the threads on your cable release. 'Cause mine, I could fix it, I suppose, and I just haven't, but the thread's stripped out and it won't take a cable, and because that's the way to fire that camera, not this. Yeah.
Do you know anything about the design? Did you ever talk to any of the people who
No.
nobody?
No, it was all, and even after twice in the John Kerry campaign in 2004, I had it on a little tripod right next to me, and some photographer in front of me is like, oh, I got to go get that side shot. And they just get up and start running without even looking where they were going and knock the whole thing over.
With the arrow on there?
With the camera, lens went flying.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and that just like, oh, sorry. Yeah, really?
You got to be. Do you find that situational awareness is something that people lack today?
It's unbelievable how people don't know where they are or what they're doing. Yeah, not everybody, but there's always. You only need one clodhopper to not be aware and kind of literally run over your camera and your tripod. So
Yeah,
it's not that hard to avoid if you just take a look.
Situational awareness is something I try to preach to people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what makes a good photographer too. Is
Sure.
you're aware of your surroundings.
That's
you're
the
aware
whole
of your
point of it.
situation.
Yeah.
You found yourself in some fairly interesting situations. Have you said you've been arrested a bunch of times?
Oh, I got detained a couple of times in Chile at a time when that was not a really fun thing to have happen. Once in Iran during the revolution, I got grabbed by the army guys because I was one step too slow to get away from what had allegedly been a secret police, SOVAC, a torture house.
Oh, wow.
And, they drove me around for a while and then let me go.
Do you ever have you gotten to a point where you're like, this is it, they're going to shoot me?
I had the crap scared out of me in Chile a couple of times. And then I, waiting to get into Chile in 1973, I foolishly, because we had to wait in Buenos Aires for about a week before the country opened up, and I foolishly put my cameras in my fishing bag and I went out to this street demonstration of young leftists and was shooting pictures, and all of a sudden these four guys surround me and a guy pulls a gun on me and they took the cameras. Amazingly, like a day or two later, I got the cameras back and the film was still in them, but it was like sometimes my own awareness of where to not go or where not to be kind of let me down, that I wasn't, you start to think that you have this impervious, like Teflon dipped coating that you can go anywhere and shoot anything, and you can't really. I mean, in the States you can, and most of Europe you can, but a lot of places, because of cultural or social or political situations, it's just not that easy or safe to be a photographer.
How did you find yourself? I mean, you come out of college and you start shooting for Time in Life?
Time magazine mainly was my main. I'd had a summer job between my junior and senior year, and when I graduated, they were like, "Oh, we thought you had another year at college and wanted to hire you for the summer." And I had plans to go to Europe after graduation with a friend from school, and we bought a car and drove around Europe for a couple of months. And I missed a lot of things. I was in Prague 3 weeks before the Russians invaded, and I remember sleeping in my car in Copenhagen, my little Volkswagen that I picked up at the factory, with the radio on, listening to the police riot in Chicago at the Democratic Convention. And I kind of missed all of that stuff, and I missed, I went around Europe for a couple of months, ended up in London, went to sleep, and the next morning, my first morning in London, I woke up to see these headlines: Russian invasion latest, tanks in the streets in Prague. And it was something that was almost, in the real word, meaning of the word, unbelievable, because I had just been in Prague 2 weeks before and kind of joking with these Czech students about, well, if the Russians come, we'll all pick up machine guns and send them packing. And in fact, the Russians really did go into Prague with tanks in 1968. It was a huge, huge story. And, I in a way, there were all these stories that I kind of missed, that I was right next to, but didn't really happen. And I came back from that trip and I started freelancing in Washington, D.C. Was there about 6 months. And as it was later explained to me, I was taking too many little day jobs from the usual crowd of freelancers, and they all suggested to the editor that they send me somewhere else. So they asked me if would I go to Miami, and I moved to Miami for what turned out to be a year and a half. And not much was going on, and while there had been a correspondent, and with a magazine like Time Magazine, it was important to work with a or several correspondents because that's what got stories in the magazine. And working with them, and if you're lucky enough to always get assigned when they would be going on a story, then you had a good shot at getting published. And it just wasn't working in Miami. And a couple of my friends who had been photographers in Vietnam said, well, there's still a lot of freelance work. This was the summer of 1970, and I ended up going in October and meaning to stay for maybe 2 months, and I stayed 2 years.
You chose to go.
I chose to go. Yeah.
No, did you get drafted at any point, or?
No, I had a back injury from playing ice hockey badly, and had a spinal fusion, and the Army didn't want me.
So you played ice hockey in the 60s? 70s?
Well, I played intramurals, but whether you were like NHL or an intramural player, the ice is always pretty hard. And if you get knocked on your butt, which is what happened, I remember when it happened, I got knocked on my butt by a guy from the other team, and it popped a disc, and later had really bad sciatica. And that was actually pretty interesting because I had this operation. I was in great shape, and then it wasn't, and I never had any back problems until about 7 years later, and I jumped out of an Army truck up on the DMZ in Korea, and I landed really hard and kind of jostled that disc area. Again, I mean, it had been fused, but my back took a lot of the brunt of that jump, and I had to do like a couple of weeks of bed rest. I've become over the years, a real fan of when something starts to hurt. And photographers always carrying too much. Your shoulder, if it's on one side, then you're cranked to kind of make up for it. So 2 bags is generally better than 1 big heavy bag. So at least as I always used to joke that if not mentally, at least I was balanced physically. And it was a really big issue when you're carrying a lot of gear. Like I would normally, in the 35 millimeter film era, I'd have 4 cameras and 5 or 6 lenses. So, 24 and a 50 around your neck, and then an 85 or a 105 on one shoulder, and the bag and the 200 or the 180 on the other shoulder. And that was just standard. You always wanted to have at least 2 color cameras and maybe a second black and white camera, just so you didn't have to spend your whole life changing lenses. You could.
What bodies were you shooting then?
Well, started out with one Pentax, an Exacta, my first camera, and then I got a Pentax H3V, and from that I graduated to Nikon and Nikkor Mat, Nikon F, Nikon F2. And people talk about sports cars, and oh yeah, there's nothing like a Carrera Porsche or something. The F2 Nikon with no meter and a motor drive, and was elegant enough to shoot fast and whack people with it if you had to whack your way through a crowd. That was a great camera. So I used Nikons from 1966 to 1978. That was 12 years. And then I changed over to Canon. Canon had just come out with a lot of new lenses, and I ended up using the Canons for 40 years. And then in 2018, I kind of had a look at the first new Sonys, and I thought, man, this is great. You're looking at the file in the viewfinder. That is really cool, and you could make all of your guesses and assumptions and presuppositions about what you wanted to shoot while you're looking at the file, and that's that really won me over, and I've had nothing but great luck with the new Sonys. So I'm pretty happy. Plus, what I really like about them, I mean, it's the cameras are great, the lenses are great, but the thin mirrorless bodies mean that you can get like a $20 adapter for every old lens that ever existed and put it on an A9 or an A7R3, which is my favorite because it's a pretty big sensor, 42 megapixel sensor. And I have, for example, I have a 500 millimeter f5 Nikon mirror lens that was made pretty much about the time of the Tokyo Olympics, 1964. And it had a Nikon F mount on the back. And I took it to a camera guy who is good at changing things around, and he converted that to a Canon EOS mount and added in between the Canon mount and the old Nikon body of lens, he took the helix out of an Olympus lens, so there's an additional half turn I can get to make it focus even closer. And then I put that on my Sonys, and it's like unbelievable. I can shoot these pictures. You can't follow focus with anything, but like with speed skating, you focus on a line and wait for him to go through it, and the pictures are beautiful. That lens is a really special lens. A lot of people, including me, have the old 500 millimeter f8, very hand-holdable 500 mil mirror lens, but the f5, which you needed at the very least a monopod or maybe a tripod. And I love that lens, and I can put that. It's 60 years old, and it fits on my camera and lets me do pictures that look like something that nobody else is making. And I've got a lot of old glass for the little format cameras, the 6500 and the 6600. Old 1940s Kodak cinema lenses. They're fantastic, super, super sharp in the center and real gooey on the edges, and on the small APS-C sensors, man, it's a look.
Yeah.
So it lets you kind of go back into time, and I've got a couple of the Helios Russian lenses, the sort of the big bokeh lenses. I don't find them quite as transformative as a lot of people talk about them, but I've got more old glass that's just waiting to leap up on one of these new camera bodies. And that to me is really one of the awesome things about the mirrorless idea, is that you can take anything that was ever on a 35 millimeter camera and shoot with it.
A lot of people, talking about gear, older photographers never adapted and evolved and just complain more about new gear instead of embracing. And it sounds like you've embraced not only obviously the old stuff, shooting the speed graphics, but embracing the new technologies and utilizing what they offer you to get better results.
It's fantastic. The first time I shot at 20 frames a second with my A9, I had just gotten the cameras and I went to the Winter Olympics in Korea, in Pyeongchang, Korea, 2018. And I was at the start of the skeleton sled races. And so everybody knows what luge is, where you're kind of sitting back with your feet out in front. And bobsled, we all know what bobsled's like. Skeleton is like when you were 11 and you got put face forward on your American Flyer sled, and your face is leading down the hill. That's where it's going. And at the start of the skeleton, it's a very interesting start because there's a little groove that's for the first like 60 or 70 feet, and the sledders kind of lean over, and they're holding on to the sled, and then they get the go, and they start, and they're running and leaning down, which is kind of a caveman era thing when you had to, chase after a furry animal that you were hoping would be dinner, and run and lean down. Nobody does that anymore except these sledders, and they run and they get up to full speed, and then they jump onto the sled. And for some reason, probably because I'd never seen anything on either television or movies or a still picture. I had always thought that there was this complete transition from running to being on the sled, that they were always holding on to the sled. Somehow they had their hand on the sled. And the first time, I still remember the first time I'm shooting this thing, you know, and follow focus as it's coming toward me, cranking off these pictures. And I look at the pictures and I realize that there is this moment when the sledder is hovering over the sled, not touching it at all. They're just in midair with nothing touching the ground and nothing touching the sled. And then they land on the sled and they take off. And I just thought, I'm looking at the back of the screen. I thought, wow, that's amazing. Did you? And I'm like, hey, did you guys see this? And of course, nobody else thought it was as cool as I did at that moment. And I shot the next one. It was like unbelievable. And it was like this whole thing of discovery. I'd never seen it on film. I'd never seen a picture. I'd never seen anything that showed me this moment of levitation that the sled riders had over their sled. And I came up with this whole thing as I'm standing there. It's like, wow, this is like a rejuvenating of the social contract between sled and driver. And it's like, okay, I'm going to get you going here. I'm going to run and get us started, and then I'm going to leap into the air. And your job as the sled is to be there when I land and have a way to head down the hill. And these pictures just blew me away. And I went back that afternoon and I found the editor of the Olympic magazine and I said, this thing is the most unbelievable. Look at these pictures. And I was like super psyched because when you see something that you've never seen before and it's explained to you in just a heartbeat of looking at it in the back of your camera, that can be very exciting. And it's like whether you're looking at the ground glass on a 4x5 or you're looking at the little TV screen on the back of a digital camera, the sense of discovery and of seeing something you haven't seen before is palpable and wonderful. And one of the reasons I love doing this is just to always be able to find things that I hadn't seen before. And I gave her my whole spiel about the social contract. And she said, can you write that up tonight? I'll put it on I'll put it on the website. And I wrote a little thing up. And it was fun because there aren't that many times or that many things that you can see anymore that are a complete surprise. And when it's something that comes out of a picture that you just shot with your own camera, with your eye, because you're looking that direction, it's very fulfilling and really fun. It puts the fun back in it all.
Well, that's the thing, is sometimes you lose. I mean, I've lost it on occasion. At the end of me shooting film in the early 2000s, I was like, this isn't fun anymore. Mm-hmm. And then when I got my first digital SLR, it was fun. I sat there and I took pictures of water coming out of the faucet with a flash. And I'm like, and I can see it. And you're getting this instant gratification. But that brought me back into it because of all the ideas that created. Now it's not like take 36 shots, don't know what you did wrong. Mm-hmm. Now you could figure everything else out.
Well, it certainly is a pathway to like your own education and discovery, and it accelerates it. And yeah, you don't have to send the film to the lab or the drugstore or something and wait a week. You see instantly. And as my friend Dave Kennerly said somewhat early on as we were all getting our new digital cameras, he said, man, the great advantage to digital photography is you know right away when you screwed up. And it's kind of obvious, but in the end, that is a gigantic step forward for whatever the creative process is you're trying to exploit.
Well, that happened to me with Bernie. I was on the road with Bernie, and I was told I wouldn't be able to get a portrait of him in the 2 days that I was with him. I don't like being told no, and that I can't do something, but I was able to get a moment between him shooting a commercial in a parking lot to photograph him. And for whatever reason, I was shooting Sony, the A7R4, and I had the 135-1.8 on, and I turned off the IAF because I'm like, I should just put the focus there. He's wearing glasses. I should rely on the old school way of doing it. Took the bunch of pictures, looked at all of them, and it was focused on the rim of the glasses. Mm-hmm. I screwed it up. Thankfully, he realized his tie wasn't straight, And he's like, why didn't anybody tell me my tie wasn't
Yeah.
straight? And so they had to reshoot the video. And I said, Senator, while they're resetting up, let me take another portrait now that your tie is fixed. Put the IAF back on. He's like, okay, hurry up. And I did it, and then I got the portrait. It was just...
Hurry up, kid. No, I know. And the thing is, the whole of your life of photography is basically figuring out ways to make up for the little screw-ups that happened 5 minutes ago, because it's nothing, unless you're working in a studio and you have total control of everything, nothing ever works out the way you kind of suppose or wish it would. So it's always what you bring to that party to try and make up for the things that get in the way that really make it fun and challenging, and occasionally, when you're successful at it, make it worthwhile.
So going on the politician side, have you had run-ins with presidents that were interesting?
Let's see here. You know, I photographed Kennedy when I was still my senior year of high school. He came to Salt Lake City.
Like a rally?
2 months. Yeah, it was. And there, I was just telling somebody this story. I had one of those light bulb moments that I had. My mom was the president of the League of Women Voters and always kind of aware of what was going on politically. And we see that tomorrow that President Kennedy's coming to Salt Lake City, and he's going to speak at the Tabernacle, and then he's going to, the next morning, he'll flip a switch at the airport, and 200 miles away, the Flaming Gorge Dam generators are going to start producing energy. So this was deemed a place that he would come and do a visit and see the leaders of the Mormon Church. So we go down to the Hotel Utah, which was the big hotel with a glassed-in atrium, and he kind of walks in and starts shaking hands with everybody. And I'm fumbling with my Pentax trying to make a picture, and everything. That night when I got home and developed the film, I realized everything was out of focus, underexposed, and blurry. It was like all three things that you never want. And it was just such a letdown. And I put that film away, and 35 years later, in 1998, I took the film out again because somebody wanted to do a project on the presidents, and I found a couple of frames that were okay. But after he did the little run through at the hotel, he went across the street to the Tabernacle, Mormon Tabernacle, this great giant hall, and was going to speak there. And I was up in the balcony looking down, kind of had a nice overall view, but there were so many people I couldn't quite get my camera up to focus. Really, you know, I had a Pentax and a 135 millimeter VMAR, probably like a 3.5 or f4 lens. And I'm just looking down there, struggling to be able to try and focus it. And I just said, the heck with it. And I put it on infinity, and I just shot the whole rest of the roll with the camera, the lens on infinity. And I got home that night and developed that film, and basically was given the gift of understanding that 60 feet is not infinity. Every frame was out of focus. It was sort of focused on across the street, which of course didn't matter because there were walls there. And it just like ticked me off. But every time I do a picture now, I mean, it's been over 60 years ago, that little moment flashes in my head like, yeah, get the focus down right, kid. You know, make sure you're in focus. Don't just shoot it and expect it to be in focus. Even in this age of amazing autofocus, and you know, I just got back from the Olympics. I was shooting the kayakers and the canoe slalom racers, zooming through the splashes of water, and and a couple of times I thought, you know, if I had my Pentax and my 135 VMAR, I would not have a single sharp picture. And yet I look at the stuff that I shot with the A9, and I borrowed an A9 III. It's pretty impressive. It's fast, and it's able to keep that autofocus in the midst of all this water spray. And what I love about this is, for me, it's like a whole new way of looking at sport, because the freezing, shooting at like a 2,000 or 4,000th of a second, the water now, instead of just being these gray or white flashes of smeared light, as Winston Churchill would have called it, like cream cheese on a bagel, just smeared across in front of the face of the canoer. Now it's frozen, and now you start to see hundreds of individual droplets of water and big globs of water that become like a character now in the picture. They are now, there's the real subject is the rider of the canoe, but the water now becomes another character, another part of the show. And to me, that is something that I like. The sled riders was something I'd never seen before, and to see these things that are right in front of you that you've never seen before is kind of a gift that the technology is giving us right now.
The tech's insane. Well, let's jump back to they drop you in Vietnam. I'm assuming drop you somehow.
Well, I bought a ticket. Someday I claim this. Someday this will be a country western tune. I bought a one-way ticket to Saigon, $512.
Really?
From San Francisco to Tokyo, Tokyo to Hong Kong, Saigon. And when I told the Time Magazine photo editor, who at the time was John Derniak, who had come to Time Magazine from Popular Photography and really was the turnaround guy that started to make Time Magazine into a player in the photo business. And I think more than anything, just as a way to cover the cost of my ticket, I think maybe in some small way he admired the fact that I wasn't being sent to Vietnam, that I bought my own ticket and I'm going to go on my own terms. But he said, and this was another, it's like I've had the good luck of all these little light bulb moments that were unimagined before they happened, and that I've tried not to lose sight of in all these years of being a photographer. But John said to me, he said, look, go draw some film from the stock room, get yourself like a couple of hundred rolls of film, which sounded like a lot, but that we used to regularly shoot a lot of film. It was not crazy to shoot 15 or 20 rolls of film in a day, but he said, no, I'll give you a $500 guarantee, and I want you to do a story called Children of War. And I thought, man, that's great. That kind of, the right side of my brain is thinking, hey, that covers my ticket. And I'd saved some money, so when I got to Tokyo, I bought a bunch of cameras, which were then really cheap. But I had this gift that he was giving me of this story idea, and I said, well, John, and I started to ask him, I said, what do you want to, and he just cut me off. He just said, no, you are the journalist. You tell me the story. And that was for somebody who had just been doing a lot of assignments from picture researchers who were being pretty explicit about what they wanted or how they wanted something covered. That was another one of those light bulb moments. It's like, yeah, I get to make those decisions myself, don't I? And I mean, over the years, I've had very good luck, and the people I knew who were very sharing and helpful along the way, and I've tried to kind of give that back to the younger people that I met along the way now, these days. But when I got to Saigon, I went over and said hello to Larry Burroughs, who was actually leaving the next day, but had a drink with him and kind of chewed the fat for a while. And then I met the Magnum photographer, Philip Jones Griffiths, Welsh guy who had spent a lot of time in Vietnam and was on his last trip there to try and finish up what would become his book called Vietnam Inc., really powerful book about the war. And Philip was another one of these guys who just was so giving and so helpful. And I had, once I arrived in Saigon, I was trying to get in touch with orphanages and relief agencies. And And Philip, at one point, after he'd heard about this for a week or two, he said, no, you're not getting it. He said, being a photographer in Vietnam right now, it's not about doing a little story for Time magazine or Newsweek. So what you need to do is put 50 rolls of film in your rucksack and go up to Da Nang and don't come back to Saigon until you've shot every roll. Just get out there and be a photographer. And I thought, I've come to realize over the years that the best thing you can do to become a better photographer tomorrow than you are today is to go be a photographer. Go shoot pictures. Go explore. Go see things that you had either a great deal about or something that you know absolutely nothing about. And engage with your eye and your camera and your whatever form, whether it's a 4x5 or a 35 or a film or digital camera. Get engaged in looking and seeing and shooting. And that's the best way. You can take all the courses you want, but being a photographer is the best way to become a better photographer.
So you're out there, you go up there with your 50 rolls. I mean, this is a war zone.
Yeah,
How do you get embedded with the Army?
You just, I was able to, I had a letter from, if you had a letter from two prospective clients, whether it was Associated Press or in my case, I got a letter from Time magazine and one from Life magazine, in which they say, we recognize Mr. Burnett as a professional in his field and we expect to be working with him going forward. And if you had two of those letters, you could get the Vietnamese Army or government, the Vietnamese government press office to give you a press card. And if they would give you a press card, then the U.S. military would give you a press card. And I still have my press cards.
So which side of was it the Viet Cong were?
The Republic of Vietnam, which was our allies and the people that, in 1975 fell to the North Vietnamese. But at the time, the Republic of Vietnam, based in Saigon, our allies, they had their whole own press operation, and they had their own army and their own air force, and Nixon was basically trying to get them to take over the war more and more and get American troops out. But there was still like 175,000 or something Americans in Vietnam when I got there. It was still a pretty big population. But the whole bureaucracy of, you couldn't just go to the Americans and say, give me a press card. You had to get it first from the Vietnamese, and then the Americans would in response to that. And then once you had that card, you could go to a base, you could sleep in a hooch if they had maybe there would be a press room, maybe not, maybe you just find a bunk somewhere and go sleep. You could ride helicopters and ride military planes. So to get up to Da Nang, you would take flight 643 Alpha for Cam Ranh Bay and Da Nang. I mean, they had a whole kind of a military airline running in Vietnam, and you would just figure out where you wanted to go and try and get yourself booked on that flight. And it was the first time I had been in some more, bit of civil strife, but I'd never really been in a war zone like this. And you just figure out what works and what doesn't, and how to act, and how, what it takes to not become a statistic. And yet, I lost a lot of friends and acquaintances in the 2 years I was there. There were a lot of press people who didn't make it home. And so you're just, every day that you were able to do some work and just be thankful for being able to do that. And I had a couple of friends from college who were in the Army, and my first trip out of Saigon and the first patrol I did was with my former college roommate, who was not a ranger, he was a scout up at a recon unit in 2 Corps up north. And I went and visited him, and he hooked me up with one of the guys in his unit, and then you learn fast how to try and be stealthy when you're on patrol, because you don't want to make noise that will be heard by a potential enemy. Just all the little stuff that it would almost be hard to write down what it is. You just start to feel it and react to it more than you're consciously aware of it. You become very unconsciously or subconsciously aware of it. And at the same time, you're looking for pictures.
Well, you were chasing the children of war,
right?
And then,
and that ended up actually being in the days when Time Magazine was not doing a lot of color work. They had to do a color layout 2 weeks before it would get printed because of the issues with their fairly antiquated press. They couldn't just put something from yesterday in tomorrow's magazine. That didn't happen until another 8 or 9 years later. In the late 70s, they were able to use color in the same way they had previously done black and white. But so I was shooting color, and I was trying to learn how to shoot color as well. I mean, you're learning all these things at once. It's like, how do I be a photographer? How do I be a good technical photographer? How do I, what light meter do I get to try and read what the light is, and how do I use it? And just, there are so many things in photography that require attention that almost nothing, now you can look in the viewfinder and you can just adjust the aperture until it looks good. I mean, and if I'd had that 50 years ago, I would have been king of America. But of course, nobody had that 50 years ago, and it was how well you learned how to maneuver in the world of film that would determine if you had a bit of a career or not.
So you ended up on the ground for something that ends up being a super iconic time, with the napalm girl.
Right.
Like how? I mean, I was reading that was a strike that was off target.
Yeah, it was it was a small village, and by the summer of '72, you no longer had this big American overlay infrastructure where you could fly somewhere. Now you had to fly Vietnamese. You'd buy a ticket on the Air Vietnam to fly somewhere. But a lot of the war was being covered out of Saigon in day trips within 50 or 80 or 100 miles, and you hire a car from the Caravel Hotel, just like a Caravel car, and it was like a '59 Chevy or a '62 Plymouth or something that had somehow made its way from Detroit, and a driver, and you just tell them where you wanted to go. And that day I was working for the New York Times, and with a reporter we went up about an hour outside of Saigon, and this little village, and some people were telling us about the fighting during the night, and they said, well, if you go about 10 kilometers up the road, there's a bigger battle going on there in this little village called Trang Bang. So we drive up there, and there's this whole line of press people across the road about maybe 500 or 600 yards outside of the edge of the village. You could see the town was little town right there. There was the pagoda, and there were the palm trees, and you could see there was a town there, and we could hear the shooting that was going on, and the grenades, and you could hear a lot of it, but you couldn't see much. And the South Vietnamese troops were engaged with North Vietnamese troops in this little village, and they called for air support. And a Vietnamese Air Force Sky Raider, 2 of them I think, came in and dropped napalm trying to dislodge the North Vietnamese troops, and they dropped it in the wrong place. And the pagoda, which had been seen as a safe place for the villagers, a number of people were right where this napalm landed, and including these kids who were some of them very badly burned. And I mean, it was one of these stories where, your own personal story really doesn't no one cares about it, really. The story was what happened with these kids. But as a photographer, I was shooting with among other things, this old screw-mount knob-wind Leica, a Model 2 Leica from 1939 or 40 maybe. And it's a very difficult camera to load. Unless you take the little film tongue and cut an extra 2 inches, no, I never bothered to do that. Then loading it, it was very persnickety, and getting the sprockets and the sprocket holes to line up was tough. And I'm trying to load this thing as the plane's coming in, shoot a couple of frames, try and reload it, and I couldn't get it to load. And then as I'm standing there, and next to me is a Newsweek reporter, Alex Shimkin, and a young AP photographer, Nick Utt, and we're just kind of watching what's going on down the road, and the smoke is billowing around the pagoda, and then out of the smoke, they start to see people running up the road toward us. And I think immediately Nick and Alex kind of realized what had happened, and they took off running down the road, and I was still fumbling with this camera. And I always, when I talk about this story, the last impression I ever want to leave is, well, if I'd loaded my camera, I would have shot that picture. That was never, and would never be anything I would presume. To my way of thinking, whatever pictures were made that day, and the particular picture in question that Nick shot of Kim Phuc, this little girl who had been badly burned by the napalm, if it was meant to be taken that day, it was going to be with his Leica at that moment that he shot it. And there are a lot of people who say, oh, Nick Utt didn't really shoot that picture. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Nick Utt shot that picture. But it's one of those stories that at the time, there's no script, there's no schedule, there's nobody telling you what to do. It's just the unfolding of life at the pace at which life happens. And as a photographer, your job is to try and catalog a few of the more salient moments. And once I finally loaded my camera, and I started walking up the road as well, and I made a few pictures of some soldiers who'd been up there who were also in that realm where they were burned by the napalm. And then as the kids came up to where all the reporters were, one of the reporters from the British TV ITN network took out his canteen, and in one of my pictures you can see he's pouring water over the little girl's burns, which may or may not really help, but at the time that was the reaction. It was like, what can we do to help calm the burn on these kids' skin? And within less than a minute, it was like, well, let's get these kids out of here. And Nick ended up taking this little girl and her siblings to the little provincial hospital that was kind of like, oh, well, we don't know what to do with these kids. We don't want to take these kids. And Nick was like, you are going to take these kids and treat them the best you can treat them. And it was one of those things that became, it was like an issue, because this little hospital was very overstressed already and didn't really have much in the way of material and support. But they took the kids in, and it wasn't until a couple of days later that she was moved to a place called the Barsky Unit, which was a hospital that specialized in burn victims. And that's where she ended up spending the next few months. I was shooting, as I said that day, for the New York Times, and part of the whole way we operated was, if you were shooting for a newspaper that belonged to the Associated Press Network, you'd go to the AP and they would soup your film for you. You could choose a couple of pictures and they would put them on the wire as a special back to the client, in this case, the New York Times. And so I happened to be at the AP when the first 5x7 print of the Kim Phuc picture came out, and I remember Jackson, who was the Japanese lab tech, coming out with his lab coat on, and he's holding this little wet 5x7 print that probably spent a whole minute in the fixer and maybe a minute being washed, and had this print. And I kind of went through this thing that I think every photographer in the history of photography has done when you're looking at somebody else's picture from a place where you also were. You look at you look at it and you're thinking, well, I wonder if I have something better than this one. And I can just remember thinking, like, that's a pretty good picture. That's a tough picture to look at, and that picture has got a lot going on in it. And I thought, well, and I had some other pictures that were okay. I chose a couple, sent them to the Times. And after what later I found out from the the former picture editor of the New York Times, who told me the whole story about how he had to fight to get those pictures on page 1 of the Times. They didn't want to run them. This little girl was naked, her clothes had all been burned off, and there was this whole, at the AP there were rules about nudity and whether or not you could move something like that on the wire. And after a little hemming and hawing about it, Horst Voss, who was the well-known German photographer and photo editor at the AP, just said, put it on the wire. And it, we had been looking at this picture. There were like 5 or 6 people in the world who had seen that picture. And then it went out on the wire and was in every newspaper in the world. The next day, probably 1 billion people saw it.
Wow.
And I didn't see Kim for 35 years until 2007, I think. And she and Nick came to Washington, D.C. to do an interview for a German television network. And I got together with them, and I kind of stayed in touch with her now since then, since the last 16, 17 years. And she had in 2012, which was the 40th anniversary. I mean, who can imagine it would already have been 40 years. She had a dinner in Toronto where she and her husband live, and all these people who had been somehow involved around her life and the photo and the life that the photo had, because the photo certainly had its own life all these years, came to this dinner. The TV correspondent who had been pouring his canteen on her, the German photographer who later managed to get her a passport and get her brought to Germany for skin treatments, a 90-year-old French-Canadian nurse who had worked in the burn unit in Saigon. All these people gathered around this subject of this photograph, and you start to realize the power of a photograph. As we see pictures every day, but there aren't that many that really have this kind of focus point around which so much history can rotate. And I think that is one of those pictures that it was the last few years of the Vietnam War. It wasn't really any Americans had anything to do with it. It was a Vietnamese Air Force plane piloted by a Vietnamese pilot. But in the more universal sense of what happens to kids in war, it's something that happens whether it's currently in Sudan or in Congo and places where you have these ongoing civil strife. It happens in so many places, and in a way, this picture, for one little moment, managed to capture some of that anguish and remind people that we have a better job to do in how we run the world.
You're in that photo? Are you in?
No, there is a guy who is, I think, the UPI stringer, who is off to the right of the full frame picture. You don't always see it. Sometimes you see the cropped version, but there's a guy in fatigue pants, and he's got his arm up like he's rewinding a camera. And for a long while, it was thought that was me, but I was actually behind Nick.
Got it.
And
so I know we're running low on time because we got to go dueling banjos with our 4x5s.
Okay.
But how many Olympics have you shot? And then how has the 4x5 played a role in what you've done?
Well, I just got back from my 14th Olympic Games. Let's see, 3 winter 11, summer, and in Paris. And there's so much going on at the Olympics. Every day there's like 5 or 8 or 9 things to choose from. And sometimes you get to be the one that chooses them, and sometimes you're working, as this year I was working with a small team of photographers, and we didn't want to all end up at the same event. So, okay, you're going to do canoe slalom, and they'll do volleyball, and this one will do 3-on-3 basketball. And so it's great because in the end, you're not just stuck like some poor wire service photographer had to photograph every 3-round boxing match. It's like, oh my God, I think I would just die of maybe not boredom, but of sameness. But there's so many different things at the Olympics that if you kind of, always come back to track and field. It's a great track meet. It's a hell of a track meet. And I have to say, I had this one incredibly touching moment where I had gone to photograph the finals of the field hockey, both men and women, one afternoon at this stadium that I had not visited before. I'm kind of standing out there, and they've repainted, everything's bright blue, and it's really nicely done. And this old stadium is kind of the spectator rows are all up under this now covered roof. And the woman who was the deputy photo person said, well, this is the actual track where the 1924 games were held, the track and field was held. And I'm standing down on the edge of the grass, realizing that I'm standing exactly where the beginning of the 100 meters track would be, and that this is where Harold Abraham's Chariots of Fire won the 100 meters 100 years ago. And I just felt like I was dipped in history at that moment. I'm just sitting there with tears coming down my face, and my cheeks just covered with tears, just thinking like, okay, it's 100 years, and that was, through Chariots of Fire, it's a movie, but we really learned so much about the 1924 Olympics and about the way amateur athletics was in those days. And this Jewish runner who'd been discriminated against a good deal in his whole trying to become the best runner in the world. And just to think that you're standing in the same place where those guys all knelt down in the blocks to run the 100, it was just very moving. And even if, I've done a lot of what could be called historic sports events, I guess, over the years. And that one just melted me into this mass of melted butter standing on the track. And it was, if I wasn't a photographer, I wasn't thinking about, at the same time, like, where would I have stood to shoot that picture? Where would I have taken my, this was in the era long before the speed graphic was invented, probably 10 years before there was even a speed graphic. But I love the fact that as photographers, we get to visit and inhabit some of these spaces that people maybe only read about or see in movies. And my speed graphic, which I had bought one, an old 50-year-old camera from my friends at the Salt Lake Tribune in the early 90s when they were clearing out their equipment closet, and a friend, I paid him $200, which probably was about $150 too much.
Yeah.
But okay, and I didn't do much with it. I took it to Normandy and I shot Omaha Beach, and I did a bunch of little projects where I was trying to figure out what to do with this camera. It forces you to see in a very different way. It slows you down. You have to really think, what picture am I going to take now? And how am I going to make that picture happen? And with all the modern digital and even 35 millimeter cameras, you just don't have that anymore. Everything is at your fingertips. It's 10 frames or 20 frames a second. And this is one frame every 2 minutes, maybe. And in that, people say to me, well, doesn't that slow you down? And my reaction to that is, well, that's the whole point. This takes me to a whole other brain exercise, like how do I become a different photographer? How do I try and make something? And I took it with me to Paris, and after a few days I took the camera out, and then I took it out a couple more times and carried it a couple more times, and I thought, okay, well, I probably shot like 30 or 40 sheets of film, and then I came home and I emptied everything, shipped it off to the lab, and I sent them an email saying, I hope you got it. When do you think we'll maybe start to see stuff? And they sent me a note back saying, well, we count that you shot 75 sheets. So I'm thinking, okay, well, I just upped my possibility of maybe having a good picture there. I mean, I do little things with it. I mean, I made a picture in Tokyo in 2021 that I really like, of a runner in a 400-meter race. So they're all staggered at the start of a 400. And so many athletes, in particular runners, will, right before they get down on the blocks, they'll just jump as high as they can. They do a little jump thing. And I have this really nice picture of like, ka-chung. And of course, with the speed graphic, rather than hearing this kind of, 20 frames a second, it's like, ka-chunk. It's like one frame. And when I'm looking at it and I hear that noise, whatever it is I'm seeing at the moment I hear that is kind of flashed into my head as like, well, maybe that's what the picture will actually look like. Sometimes it does, and it's a great joy when you get a picture that is at least as good or rarely even better than you thought it would be.
Well, so in the Olympics, you bring your 4x5 this year, and you post a picture that people attributed to the 4x5 that wasn't the 4x5.
No, that was hilarious. I shot a picture at beach volleyball, which is right in the base, essentially the base of the Eiffel Tower. And I had met up with this great British sports photographer, Bob Martin, at the top of the press tribune overlooking beach volleyball. And in front of us, there's the court and there's the Eiffel Tower. And Bob, who is also, I mean, I've done 14 Olympics. He's probably done 10 or 12. So between us, we got like 25 Olympic games. And he's looking around at it, and he looks down and he says, "This is the most iconic view you'll ever have at the Olympics. The Eiffel Tower, the court of the beach volleyball." And I said, I think I'm going to agree with you here, but let's officially vote on it just to make it so. And I said, I vote for this is the most iconic. And he kind of waved his hand. I said, okay, it's officially the most iconic view. And I had my phone out, and I was just kind of shooting some stuff. And as I often do, I made a frame with the Tintype app on my phone, and it popped up. And as Tintype does, it kind of is this faux impression of what an 1894 wet plate picture might have looked like. And without making a big deal about it, I just posted that picture with my little conversation with Bob Martin and a picture of the two of us on my Instagram, and which then gets fed over to Facebook. And people just thought, oh my God, Burnett's already shooting 4x5. And I had no way to process anything. So it was pretty clear to me that, like, where would I guess I could have souped in my hotel room, but I never had time to do that anyway. But it was funny because there was just this assumption that it was shot with a 4x5 camera. That said, I went back the next day or 2 days later with my Aero Ektar on my speed graphic and my little tripod, and I shot about 8 or 10 sheets of film just so that I would have an actual large format picture of the most iconic view in Olympic sports. So.
And that's that.
And I haven't seen any of the film yet.
Oh, you still haven't seen it?
No, it's all at the Indy Film Lab in Montgomery, Alabama. Great lab. Mostly they work with wedding photographers, so they don't do like instant press style turnaround stuff. It's like, I send them the film. If I see something in a week or two, I'll feel like that was pretty good timing.
Yeah.
And I'm, by now I'm kind of over it. I'm still editing my digital stuff, and occasionally I'll see something. It's like, there's a surprise, and then there's the good surprise.
Yeah.
And when you have a good surprise, then you feel like, okay, I managed to come up with something here. And I'm still having that with my digital pictures, and at some point, maybe next week, I'll start to see the film scans come back.
Well, we could talk for hours, but
Yeah.
I mean, there's a million things I still want to talk about, but we got to go. I know you have to do some portraits. Closing words for just something to tell a photographer to remember.
Okay, all I can tell you is I keep going back to this thing, and it came out of just a discussion with some friends when I was trying to figure out if I was going to teach a workshop or not. And I said, well, listen, if you're going to be a photographer, the best way to become a better photographer is to go be a photographer. Don't sit around and wait for somebody to tell you something or to assign you. You have to assign yourself. It's like John Derniak said to me, you're the photographer, you're the journalist, you tell me the story. And so everybody in their own way, doesn't have to be a big news story, but whatever it is that intrigues you, go shoot it and look at it and then go shoot it again and make it better.
I agree. Thank you for taking your time.
Pleasure.
Pleasure. I'm going to go get photos of you taking photos with your 4x5, and then hopefully get a portrait of you with my 4x5.
Well, it's stay tuned, Pete.
Stay tuned. We also gained about 2 stops of light since we've been sitting here.
But it's nice, soft.
Perfect.
It's this. Everything is like a giant softbox overhead.
It's a bright overcast, not a dark overcast. It's a bright overcast.
Yeah. B-O.
Thank you very much.
Bright overcast. Anytime.